There we go. All right. Okay, so now I got to do this. Make sure that's open. Okay. Think I got everything. Okay, here we go. Oops. Good evening, everybody. 6 o'clock. Time to get rolling here. I've already started it going. As always, feel free to put any questions in the chat box. Chris Jeffrey's back with us. He is monitoring that. So if you have that, and then we will have our normal open mic session at the end. That's my reminder. We got it going. Just a reminder for the remaining Zoom sessions here on Sunday evenings. 6A, kudos next week. And then we wrap it up with the Open Championships in the following 2 weeks. Um, the Tucson tip-off meeting, as you remember, is tomorrow night at the Flowing Wells High School cafeteria. Check in at 5:15-ish. And the meeting will start promptly at 6 o'clock. And for any transfers, a reminder that the transfer scrimmage will be at Brophy on November 13th, again starting at 6 o'clock. And ready for the video, but just a reminder, and we've got some interesting situations tonight, some couple of challenging. And so please be reminded that we're dealing with high school basketball, of course, and the idea is for educational purposes and not to embarrass any official coach, player, or institution. So we start off with the girls' 5A state championship game, and our crew, Billy, Sam, and Jaden, have a lot of good stuff for us. Starting right off with a correct call, dealing with an off-ball screen. And also, we're going to have several of these tonight, actually. New example of new rule situations. And this one's going to pertain to the throw-in spot. So let's take a look. So a close-up of that screen, as you can see, the screener, again, must ensure that their feet are no wider than their shoulders. And if you remember, the interpretation changed last year. So this is important to make sure that we understand this. And that's why I like this particular clip, because this is a situation where they are going to get tangled up with the legs. So as a result, that's what makes this an illegal screen. I hope I don't confuse anybody by this. If that defender had gone into the torso of white jersey number 25, then that screen would have been considered to be legal even though the feet were wider. That's a new interpretation, or at least new last year. But this year, this is a correct call, as we said at the beginning. It was a good call all the way around. So we need to make sure of the difference between the two. And if you should have a question on that, again, Chris is monitoring the chat box. Okay, the second part of this, as we said, is dealing with this year's new rule. Well, actually, it's not new for us really. But it's dealing with the foul location. And as we can see, the foul location here is outside of the three-point arc. And as a result, we need to take a look at what's going to happen this year and make sure that we're putting the ball back in play at the correct spot. So there's the spot from the past, and this year this throw-in should occur up at the 28-foot line. So we're going to move it up, a few feet. Nothing major here, but it should go. Remember, just to review, all throw-ins, except for a ball that goes out of bounds, will be at one of those 8 designated spots. So that's something we need to keep in mind and we need to focus on. Last year, remember, it didn't apply to the backcourt. All right, this next one is a kickball. This is going to be a quick one, just a review of the kickball rule because it happens really quick. So of course, the key focus here is when the player intentionally stops the ball with her foot. And as we can see, black number 22 just quickly kicks that foot out, stops the ball from going past her. And as a result, Billy was right on the spot and got this correct. This is a good job here. And Jaden does a nice job here with clarifying. You can't see this, but on the tape, the black coach of the black team actually was inquiring because she couldn't see it. It was on the way to the far end of the court on the other side of the court. And you could tell what happened. He does a nice job as we go back to live action. We can see he's going to give the kick signal and let her know what it is. So it was good communication with the coach. And as you can see, that's an important thing to get across. All right, this next one actually doesn't come in the category of any kudos per se, but again, as I said, what I'm trying to do as we get closer to the season, if we get a chance in these games to see something in regard to new rules, then let's take advantage of it, and that's what this one is all about. And actually, there's 2 situations here, and they deal with throw-in spots. So you can see we have a held ball. It's going to be inside the 3-point arc. So just a reminder that play will be resumed at the 3-foot spot on the end line. It's pretty basic. And the second one, now this one's a little bit more challenging. So what's going to happen here is we're going to have the coach request a timeout. And as you can see, when we get back to live action, the player is actually straddling the line. So you can't really be wrong here except one way. In other words, if you felt it was inside the arc, then you would put the play after the timeout back in at the 3-foot bar. Or if you felt more of it was outside, then you would move it all the way up to the 28-foot line. Okay. The key thing is to make sure that we don't put the ball in play right there like what we used to do in the good old days at the nearest spot. So again, this is another example of a throw-in that's required at one of the 8 spots. And hopefully we've got that squared away.
Jeff, can I jump in here and make a suggestion that on the play like that, that as we're going and telling the table that we've got a timeout, that we'll tell the coach where that ball is going to be inbounded. Especially important in these first few years where we got the change, because she's probably going to set up a play in that corner. So just to be aware.
That's a good suggestion. All right, back to the kudos. Number 3. This one, as I said, I try to find one every week that's dealing with the open view. And we have one here where we're going to have our official adjust their position, having a sense of urgency to get the open view. So as you can see right here, we stopped the action. Jaden's got pretty good open view already, but he felt that he needed a little bit more, and that's a good habit to get into, especially with the three-point shot that comes near the line itself. And as you can see, he's just going to slide to his left a little bit, and he's going to obtain an even better open view than what he had. Nice job. All right, another learning situation. This is dealing with a loose ball. So we need to really dissect this one and just review the rule a little bit here. Remember that every player is entitled to a spot on the court. And sometimes when we have a loose ball, we kind of tend to forget that and we kind of let a free for all. And we got to be careful with that. And I think this clip does a good job of showing why. Because what happens here is that the rules simply state whoever gets there first is entitled to that spot and they can't be illegally contacted by their opponent. So what you see here, what I've done is I've tried to put in their vertical space. You know, a lot of time we think of vertical space as when the players are standing up. But in this case, if they're on the floor, they also have a vertical space. That's her space. White number, I think that's 10, is has got to that space first. So that means the defender is responsible for not causing contact of extending an arm, a shoulder, a hip, or a leg, or in this case, a whole body, and moving them out of that space. So as you can see, when we get back to live action, the black player is going to knock her out of the space, and actually she's going to replace her, and and actually ends up in her spot. So this is illegal contact, and we have to resist going with a held ball here, and we should probably be thinking about a foul in this particular case. All right, next one. Number 5. The old good old-fashioned spin move. Remember, we really have to find the pivot foot to be accurate in making rulings in regard to violations involving the spin move, and our crew does a real good job on this one. And I think it's Billy. Yeah, Billy. Now, obviously, it's really easy with stop action, but this is how, if you're new to officiating, these are the things that you got to be thinking about and being able to make a judgment really quick. That's find the pivot foot. So in this case, you can see white number 1 ends her dribble. Once the dribble has ended, the foot, if there's one foot on the floor, that's the pivot foot. So in this case, her left foot becomes her pivot foot. And obviously, she can spin with the right foot, which she does here. That's perfectly legal. The only catch is she's now lifted that pivot foot. That's fine. The only catch is she obviously has to release the ball on a pass, a shot, or she technically could call timeout, but that's unusual in this situation. So she's got to release that ball before that left foot, that left pivot foot comes back down. And as you can see, we get back to live action. She places it back on the floor, and that's where the travel takes place. Nice job. Number 6. The old lovely no call correct. Again, sometimes we don't get enough credit for calls that really, calls that have a whistle, everybody knows. But calls that don't have a whistle, people that aren't knowledgeable about officiating can't get an appreciation for this. In this particular case, we're going to have a potential backcourt violation, but they're going to know the rule and allow play to continue correctly. And the key to this is because remember, on throw-ins, there's an exception to the backcourt rule. There's actually two other exceptions. This what you just saw there is also applies to a jump ball situation or when the defense. But in this case, we're talking about a throw-in, and we'll try to explain that and review it for you veterans. So what's going to happen here? White number three catches the ball with both feet off the floor, and she's going to land in the backcourt. Even though her status was front court, the rule, the exception on a throw-in. Now remember, this is just on a throw-in. If this was regular play, this would be backcourt. But because it's on a throw-in, she left the front court. She's allowed to come back down in the backcourt. Nice job here of allowing play to continue. No call correct. Now, interestingly enough, we do have a situation, though, coming right up here, where we have a backcourt situation during regular play. Let's take a look. And before we get to the teaching points, I got to give you a little background on this situation. Sam, who was the official involved here, I gotta give him a kudo for what he did this week because he knew that the 5As were going to be featured, and he knew that there were several situations in that game that were probably going to be highlighted for the good and for the learning purposes. And this is one of them. And that's the sign of a good official that knows that they might have made a mistake and that they weren't quite sure, but they wanted to make sure that they now understood that. So Sam got in touch with me at the beginning of the week, and he actually pointed out four plays that he thought needed a good discussion, and this was one of them. And when we get back to the teaching points here, you'll see what the issue is. And this, by the way, is more difficult than some of them because what happened here, if I run this back just a little bit, uh, get to the teaching point. Okay, I'll stop it. What makes this so difficult is we had two situations. One, right here, we see the white jersey player. This is now, that's on a throw-in, just like the previous clip that we had. The difference, though, is that she didn't control it. She tips it. So obviously, Sam has got to process that. In addition, you notice that the black jersey player, there's potential here, and I'm not saying there was, but there's potential here for a foul. So Sam has got to make a decision on, backcourt on the throw-in. He's got to be thinking about a foul, and then lo and behold, it looks like it's pretty clear. And as we know, what's going to happen, this girl down here is going to come out of nowhere, and she's going to jump in the air. Whoops, I don't want to stop it there. Wait a minute. So she's going to jump from her front court, gains control in the air, and then is going to land in the backcourt. So remember, this is different from the previous clip because this is in regular play now. So her status is front court. And as a result, when she lands in the backcourt, she now has caused the ball. She was the first to touch it. I should say the last to touch it in the front court and is the first to touch it in the backcourt. And that's the definition of a backcourt violation.
Can I comment, Jeff, that
Please,
the positioning of our three officials is nearly perfect here. Many times as throw-in where that throw-in took place, I see our center official at the free throw line extended and the lead official already on the end line. So in this case, the center official being Sam, he's in perfect position to make a ruling.
Good. All right, number 7. This is a point of emphasis this year, and that's dealing with contact on the ball handler. All right, so a little bit of review in regards to a block versus a charge. In this case, we have to remember that every time we have a block charge situation, we have to first of all decide where the path of that offensive player is. So right now, the path, which I tried to highlight here, here's the path of the offensive player. And as we can see, black number 5 here has obtained legal guarding position in the path of that white 0. Of course, the offensive player has a right to change that path. And that's what's going to happen in this case. And that's what's going to make this kind of play so difficult. Because when the player changes their path, that forces the defender here to reestablish their legal guarding position. And 5 is going to give it a good shot. But when we get back to live action, right there, she only got one leg in that new path of 0. So when 0 created a new path, black number 5 had to re-obtain legal guarding position, and she didn't do that. And as a result, we have a correct ruling here on a block. Now, one of the reasons why it's a point of emphasis this year is right there where we take a look. Look at number 5. I am so innocent. I got my hands in the air. How can that be a foul against me? We already know about that. We see that a lot. We're going to see it a lot this year. We just have confidence in ourselves to make sure that we understand the rule. And it doesn't matter necessarily. Your hands can be in the air. You may think you're vertical, but your legs and your hips and your shoulders also need to be legal. And they weren't in this case. And therefore, we have a correct block foul ruling. All right, now we come to the challenging plays that Sam was talking about. And
Hey, Jeff, before you go
yep,
on, can I make a comment on that?
yep.
It looks like the ball handler gathered before the contact. Would that be considered a shot going up because Billy called it on the floor and pointed to the baseline?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've got a clip coming up later on that's going to deal with that very topic in
Perfect.
regard to that. And that's another, and actually, that's a good point, John. That's another point of emphasis this year, and that's regard to as a group of officials across the country, not just Arizona, across the country, we have way too many on the floor rulings. Exactly for what you're doing. To be honest with you, I didn't even think about that in this particular case. But yes, gathering and ending the dribble, and that's the beginning of a shot. And we'll cover that more thoroughly in just a couple more plays.
Perfect.
Okay? All right, some challenging plays, and boy, these are challenging. No question about it. First of all, there's going to be, believe it or not, in this game, potentially 4 intentional fouls. And when I say intentional foul, you're probably immediately thinking, well, end of the game situation, that's easy. They're trying to stop the clock, blah, 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 blah. These are dealing with situations during the middle part of the game. This one I think is in the beginning of the second quarter or some. We'll see it when we get rid of that graphic. But this this one actually back-to-back plays that could have been ruled intentional, I think. Let's take a look. I'm glad I wasn't on the court for this one, no, for either one of these. I know that was quick. All right. So it's a little bit fuzzy, I realize, but I think we can see clearly enough what's happened here. The white jersey player was quick enough, taps the ball away, and now is ready to break away. Black number 22 grabs the jersey on a clear breakaway situation, and that meets the definition of an intentional foul, no matter what part of the game that's in, because obviously there's a huge advantage gained here by stopping this fast break from occurring. And here it is from the other side of the court. So there's the steal and there's the grab. So just to review the intentional foul rule that applies here, a player that contacts an opponent and negates their obvious advantageous position. I think you can say that the white jersey player was in an advantageous position because she was about ready to head a break, at least 3-on-2, maybe 3-on-3, but nevertheless a good break. And even a second component comes into play, and that is when a player contacts an opponent without making a legitimate attempt on the ball. Grabbing a jersey is not a legitimate attempt on the ball, and it also says on the opponent in the rule. So there's one. Challenging play number two. So think of those two things that we just talked about. Playing the ball, playing the opponent, advantageous position taken away. Now, again, not much of a push, but obviously just enough. And I know that graphic got cut off a little bit at the bottom, but basically it says the exact same thing that I had on the previous slide. And up here at the top is an important thing. As a crew member, especially in a crew of three, sometimes the official that's back away from the play might be able to see and digest it a little bit better than the person that actually is putting the whistle on it right away. So the point here is that, again, I'm not saying to come in and overrule, and I'm not saying to come in and make a big scene. Just come in, supply information, and then the calling official will make a decision on whether or not they upgrade. And if you remember last week, we had a real good example of that, where the partner came in, gave the information to uh, the partner, and the partner did decide to upgrade. So that's a very important technique to use.
Jeff, can we go over the ruling there where we got to remember that intentional personal, the player that was fouled is the one that's going to take the two free throws and their team gets the ball out of bounds.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes we forget. In fact, I think 2 weeks ago we had a good intentional foul ruling, but two things were wrong, and that was we let a team pick who the shooter was, and secondly, we went to the division line opposite the table to resume play. So remember, in this case, I don't know what this number is right here, but this player right here, she would be the one that would want to be the shooter. And as John just mentioned, the ball comes back into play at the nearest, and I'm going to say this is the new terminology, at the nearest applicable designated spot. So in this case, that would be the 3-foot line here on the end line. Thank you for bringing that up. That's very, very important. All right. This is the one I got ahead of myself a little bit. Boy, these two are on these two is back to back. This happened within, as you can see, this is the third quarter, 3 minutes to go in the third quarter. So, you think intentional fouls only happen at the end of the game. And here's an example, two examples actually. So we got the view from both sides of the court. A lot of stuff happening here. Now, before we go any further, I want to get back to Sam's point. When Sam got in touch with me, he said, Jeff, he says, I got a couple of situations where I think we might have had an intentional foul. He didn't tell me where, when, or what. He just said, I think. He said, take a look and see what you think. So when I watched the game tape, I picked out a couple of those other ones. To be honest with you, I didn't have an intentional foul on either one of these until, and then the good thing with Sam is we actually, I call it a Zoom, I guess it's a Google Meet or whatever, but we Zoomed together and we went over and he says, no, Jeff, look at this more carefully. And I don't know if you saw it when you guys and gals were first watching this, but watch what happens here. I didn't see it. I know it's a little fuzzy. So I want to be fair. Whoops. I don't want to miss this point. In fairness to Jaden, look at this headlock. There's no way he can see that. And, you say, well, why is he straight line? We're going to get straight line. In a crew of three, we are going to get straight line no matter what. The point here is to learn is this is the reason why we say try not to. But he does a good job. He calls what he sees. And what he sees is over here on the right. As you can see, he can't see. He cannot see that bear hug right there. If there's going to be an elevation in the file, an upgrade of the file, it is going to have to come from one of the other two officials. So please understand, we're not faulting our center official at all. He calls, the key thing is he called a foul, and that's what's most important. Excellent job. Now, that bear hug, or whatever you want to call it, obviously gets a little bit under the skin of white zero. Watch her closely if you didn't notice. If you did notice it, kudos to you. I'll tell you, I didn't notice it. But watch the shenanigans that goes on here. We can learn from this situation right here, and it's going to enforce or reinforce the reason why we bounce the ball on the sideline. And even then, because Jaden is actually going to do a pretty good job of bouncing the ball on the sideline, but even then, we sometimes get caught, as we'll see when we get back to live action. So you can see what happens here. There's going to be intentional leg action, a leg trip, and there would have been an opportunity for an upgrade on this situation as well. Let's take a look at it from the other side of the court. All right. There's the there's the bear hug or the neck hug or whatever you want to call it, looking right over Jaden's shoulder. You can see all he can tell basically is a balk. Now, this is where we can't let our guard down. And it's easy for us on a Sunday evening sitting in our easy chair to criticize here, but it's a perfect example of where we've got to come alive in dead ball situations. And I'm not talking just about Jaden, I'm talking about the whole crew. And as we see when we're going to pan back, there's going to be, this is going to be a weird situation where most of the players are going to be above the free throw line extended. You'll see that in just a second. So watch zero here. So we're going to have a little bit now. It's easy for us, 2020. As I said, we're going to see some patty cake action. Slapping of hands, one hand off, two hands off. So the point here is that we want to get good distance if at all possible, and we need to monitor this. Now, obviously, his number one responsibility is the thrower. This is where the other officials come in, and we'll talk about that in just a second. If we see the patty cake, then obviously we want to go in preventative and just say, okay, knock it off. Knock it off. I'm watching you two like a hawk. And then follow through with it. Because if you said you're going to watch them like a hawk, then I think you'd see what happens next. But right here, I'd be willing to bet that Zero says, hey, I got away with the patty cakes. I bet I can get away with this trip. To Jaden's credit, no way. He got it. Now let's talk about the rest of the crew. We talked about this the last couple of weeks in regards to secondary coverage. A couple of good examples here of secondary coverage and how that works. First of all, that's the other thing that makes this very difficult. We're involved in a rotation. As you can see, Sam has closed down, and now because we have a low post action here, and actually we have 2, 4, 6, so we have a majority of the players on this side of the court. So he does the correct thing and initiates the rotation. That's exactly what the lead needs to do. And he's not ball watching. His job is to have eye discipline and focus right here on this competitive matchup, which you can see, I think he's doing. All right. So that brings us to Billy over here, who's in a trail position. And by the way, you may say, well, he was pretty deep, but if you remember, there were players out here. So he now, because we have a rotation, he's now closing down to his center, his new center position. And in the process, obviously, he's got to try to figure out where is there a competitive matchup? Where can I help? And as you look, you can see actually there is no competitive matchup in his primary coverage area. So this is what we mean by create a secondary coverage area. So he's got to look across the basket line, and hopefully he would have seen some of this action right in here. Secondary coverage. So again, from our easy chairs and actually seeing many, many replays on this, we might say, see how our lead and center could be alert for off-ball situations. That's just something that we've got to have up on our head all the time. We can't let our guard down. And as I said, that's easy on a Sunday evening when we're totally relaxed.
Hey Jeff, there's a question on the second
Yep.
play. The question is, should the C have gone up higher to help Jaden on that inbound?
Should the C have gone up higher to help? You're talking about the new C.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say, yeah, there's no problem. If we take a look again, yeah, that's a good question. If we take a look, we need to assess what have I got in my primary coverage area. I got 4 players with great distance. So yeah, no, this is clearly an example of where, And again, that's why we say no position is 100%. You know, when we say center position is free throw line extended, that's in best case scenarios, which doesn't always happen. And that's a good example right here, right now. We've got what? Two, four, six players up here between 28 foot and the division line. So that would be a good suggestion where the center might come up in here and you're right. He actually might have been screened out by this player here and could not see that action. So yeah, that would be a good suggestion. All right. One suggestion though, however, as you notice here, I know John has said this more than once throughout all our times in making presentations. When we go back to our position, we want to keep our head to the players. And this is a classic example of here of why we might not have seen this because we're not really looking at the players. And just a reminder, remember the punch is no longer part of the team control foul. We need to go behind the head and we need the forefinger directional signal. But these two plays, bang bang, were very, very difficult. All right. The last one here with the 5A girls is another this one I think you can be right either way. The question is it out of bounds or do we have a shot clock violation? It is so close, it's very difficult to say 100%. From the other side of the court, so here's the situation. Obviously, with the advantage of replay here, we can't use it in the arena, obviously, but we can see the shot clock, and here we know that the we have an LED that deals with the shot clock in the end of the quarter. That has not been lit. So as a result, we can see that Sam already is stopping the clock. So that means that there's probably time left. And as it turns out, you can see down at the bottom of the screen here, we actually have 1 second on the shot clock. But again, that's easy for us with stop action. The key here is if no crew member has, and the key word is definitive knowledge, that means they actually were looking at the shot clock and they saw one when they heard Sam's whistle. Then you could say there's 1 second left on the shot clock. That's why I'm saying you could have gone either way on this because neither one of them evidently had definitive knowledge. And as a result, what's going to happen next is, I think, really good because Sam really doesn't know. He's focused on the out of bounds situation. But what's going to happen is our center official, Jaden, is going to, and he hustles in. He doesn't make a scene. He doesn't point at the clock or all this other stuff. He provides the information to the calling official, and a quick decision, and I emphasize quick decision, was made without the advantage of using a monitor. The decision was that the shot clock actually had expired, and therefore we have a violation. All right, I'll stop right there and just check in with Chris one more time.
No, sir. No other questions.
Okay, then we are going to move to the 5A boys with Jay, James, and Bob. And we start right off with a correct call dealing with an illegal screen. Going to be similar to the one we actually had to start off with the girls' game. So again, we take a look at the screener and we can see the feet are outside the shoulders. So again, remembering from last year's interpretation, we need to be concerned with does the wide stance affect the defender's ability to continue to play? If it does, we have an illegal screen, and that's what's going to happen here. Now, if four had gone into the torso of red 22, please remember from last year's new interpretation, even though the feet were wide, that would have been okay. But because the wide stance affected the white player, number four's ability to play defense, that's an illegal screen. Here is a great example of how to reverse an out of bounds call that there's obvious uh, correction that's needed. Professionally done. So the key takeaways here. It appears that the ball, again, we don't have a good camera angle. We don't have the angle that our center official had. It appears that the ball was last deflected right here by the white jersey player. I know it's a little fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure by the reaction of the players, reaction of the bench, reaction of the fans, I think it's pretty obvious that it went off white. What's really good about this is the way the partner comes in. Not making a big scene, not, going with a tip signal, just calmly comes in, provides the information, and that's the key word, provides the information, brings the information to the partner, and then lets the calling official, the calling partner, is going to decide if he or she is going to take their advice. And in this case, you can see that our league decides that, yes, I guess I did make a mistake, and he will act just like the call occurred right there. He will basically tap his chest, my mistake, and point in the correct direction and make sure we get it correct. Well done. Whoops, what we got here? Fifth one, I think. Oh, third one. All right, another correct call dealing with a player control foul. This is a challenging one, but correct. And this tells us that these officials understand the rule of block charge. So for you new folks, remember our checklist that, and I don't have path on there, but the key thing is that red is in the path of the white jersey player. So there are three checklist items that need to be in effect for this red jersey player to obtain legal guarding position. 2 feet on the playing court, right here, check. Facing opponent, check. Position was obtained before they left the floor. Obviously, he's not left the floor, so we got check, check, check. So if there is any torso to torso contact that is excessive, then obviously the onus is on the white jersey player. That's what happens here. And the other thing to note, and this is the tough part of block charge, obtaining, but that doesn't mean you got to just stand still. You can maintain. And to do that, you can move laterally or obliquely or backwards, in other words. The only thing you can't do is step forward. And as you can see here, our red jersey player just moved laterally and was contacted. And as a result, good call. All right. This is the one when John White was talking about gathering and the possibility of in the act of shooting. We're going to take a look at this. And as I said, this is a 2025 upcoming season point of emphasis. Continuous motion versus on the floor. All right, so just to review, remember two things come into play. The act of shooting. When does the act of shooting begin? And the answer is pretty easy, actually. When the usual throwing motion, but whatever that motion is that takes place, and usually it's dealing with an arm, upward motion, what have you. And when does continuous motion come into effect? And that is once they try begins, they are allowed to complete their arm movement. And this is where the point of emphasis comes in this year by the Rules Committee, allowing a player, and I mean, the rule always allowed the player, but the feeling was we weren't doing a good job of letting them pivot or letting them step while they're holding the ball. In other words, to complete their whole trying, habitual throwing motion. And that's what's going to happen here. So, White Zero ends his dribble. The question is, ask yourself, why did he end his dribble? What's he trying to do? Now, maybe he's going to pass, and that's fine. If he passes, he passes. But he's probably, in most cases, when they're driving to the basket, he's trying to score, right? He's trying to attempt to shoot. So the act of shooting begins right here, and I've got to say it, even though they're on the floor. So we have a lot of times we misuse that term, and I know it's not through any intent, but we kind of imply that you can't score on the floor. And obviously that's not true. So, and John used the term to gather. That's another one that you could use. He's gathered the ball. That means that they've now started their try and they're allowed to continue their habitual throwing motion. So he's going to go up through normal arm and leg motion, even though he's on the floor. All
Jeff,
right.
Jeff, if I can comment on that last play, um, the signal was given on the floor, okay, and that, just as you pointed out, makes people think that you can't have a two-shot foul that's on the floor. So we need to get that out of our vocabulary, and we need to get that signal out. If we do have a foul prior to the act of shooting, we want to wave it off like no good.
That's good. Absolutely. All right. Kudo number four, the lovely flopping warning situation. All right. Again, our camera angle isn't the greatest, but it appears that there's no contact on the follow through here. The arm is below, the defender's arm is below. The shooter has got a nice follow through. The ball has got a nice arc to it. So I think this is pretty obvious that this is obviously trying to fool our official, faking being foul, better known as the flop. So how do we handle it? Um, I've been asked by a couple of officials to make this reminder, and I think it's a good one. Please understand that what we're doing in Arizona, and actually let me go one step further. Right here. Commissioner Gessner at the Phoenix tip-off meeting and last year at the tip-off meetings and throughout the season, and through a memo actually, has made it very clear that in Arizona, we are to sound the whistle immediately when, in our opinion, we have a flop. Now, we can debate what is a flop and what isn't. That's not the point. That's not for a whole other session. But if you're going to give a flop warning, or I should say ruling, then we need to have a whistle right away. And what a couple of officials that have approached me said, Jeff, please remind everybody that the National Federation, anything you read from the National Federation is totally, I mean, totally different than what we're doing in Arizona. In fact, what they're doing is last year they did have one instance where they did have a quick whistle. They've taken that out. In all of the three possibilities of faking being fouled, they want to let the play continue through. So in other words, you're going to give the flop warning, but there's not going to be a whistle. We are not going to do that. The other reason why they wanted a statement made is that for those of us who watch a lot of college basketball, remember college basketball is also totally different than us in regard to having an immediate whistle. So we've got to get on board with that. And actually, I really personally think that's the easiest way for us to go because if you stop and think about it, if we wait for all the other scenarios, and you can go read them if you want to. I don't suggest doing that. It's just confusing if you do. I just think this is the easiest way to go. Now, there's two things that can happen here that we need to understand, and this is a reason why this is a good clip. So what happens is, how do we resume play? We've got our official that gave the correct signal once. Remember, it's only one. I have a flop. Okay, whistle. I'm going to go report it to the table. I'm going to tell the coach that their team has been warned. And now, how to resume play? Two possibilities. It depends on what happens with that ball because the flop obviously occurred after the ball was released. So, if the ball went in the basket, please make sure that you count it. That's not a flop is not a violation. It's just a warning. So if it goes in, you count it. It's just like any other made basket. The opponents are going to take the ball out of bounds on a normal throw-in situation administered by the nearest official at one of the applicable designated spots, remember. Secondly, if the ball is missed, and this is the tricky part, if the shot doesn't go in, then what we need to do is we go to the alternating possession arrow. That will determine. In this particular clip, they lucked out. It happened to be, this was right at the beginning of the fourth quarter, I think, or one of the quarters. Red team, this is actually the result of the throw in from the red team. So the arrow was to the white team. They're going to get the rebound, as we'll see when we get back to live action. Oh, I guess I cut it off. But they actually had the ball, so that was easy. But that would be the case where the arrow does come into play. All right, kudo number 5. Offense initiating the contact. Always a challenging situation. And talk about watching college and the pros. Great call. Great call. Of course, the player didn't think so. So, white number 4, legal guarding position. Now, some of you may say, well, he wasn't facing. Please understand it's a basketball facing. We don't go and actually, every time we play defense, we're perfectly square. In fact, in most cases, we have a staggered stance like we see here. So this is a basketball facing in the path of the offensive player, 2 feet on the floor, and he obviously got there before an airborne shooter. So, legal guiding position. The onus is now on red 35. And we can tell what happens. Bump one, bump two, bump three. Or I should say, displaced one, displaced twice, displaced three times. It's got to be called, even though you see it on TV all the time. In fact, sometimes you'll see that as called as a block. No way. Good call. Tutor number 7, no call correct, dealing with verticality. So obviously verticality, we want to put in our vertical space. We can see red 22. There's his vertical space. He's going to jump in the air. There is some contact, but the contact is not caused by red 22. What contact is caused by white number 4. Now, I'm not saying the contact was illegal. It obviously wasn't enough to affect rhythm, speed, balance, and quickness of red number 22. Therefore, this is a classic example of incidental contact, and our crew does a nice job of letting play continue because they understand the verticality rule. Number 8, no call correct. Illegal Eurostep. Some people say that a Eurostep is always illegal. Not the case here. Not the case here. We'll break it down. So again, the key is, where does the dribble end? The dribble ends with his right foot on the floor. That becomes the pivot foot. He's going to leap, a giant leap, which is okay. Lands on the left foot. He obviously has lifted the pivot foot. And so now he's got to release that ball, and he's athletic enough that he rises off the left non-pivot foot, releases the ball in an attempt. Nice play. And I think this is either the last one or next to last one. Another learning situation, dealing with new rule. And this is interesting, I think. I've got label here, no call correct. Remember, this game was played under last season's rule, so that's why it's a no call correct, because the blackboard is slapped and they let play continue. Last year, that's perfectly fine for this type of slap. I don't want to go into all the others, but for this type of slap, I think it was perfectly fine. This year, however, this is the important thing to get out of this. This year, however, it would have been labeled as an incorrect call. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this crew had an incorrect call on this, because by last year's rule, they were perfectly fine. But put yourself in the game this year and watch this clip. All right. I know there's a lot of words up there, but I wanted to make sure I think this helps us understand. Last year, remember, slapping of the backboard was either nothing, like what we saw there, or a technical foul when it really elevated itself to that stature. So, as you can see, that rule has been taken out altogether. All that red is gone. It's no longer a technical foul. However, it is now has been added to the basket interference rule. So the second part of basket interference, when a player slaps or strikes the backboard, that causes the backboard or basket to vibrate while the ball is on or within either basket, or is touching the backboard or within the cylinder. Now, there's a lot of words there. I'm going to try to put it in simple English. Again, it's got to be a slap or a strike that clearly vibrates the backboard. I was asked a question up to Phoenix in regard to, well, what about a tap? Well, if you're ruling it was only a tap, then just say that it was a tap. But if it was a slap or a strike, and you know what a slap or a strike is, you can see the board vibrating and it's going to go on for a couple of seconds. That's what we're talking about here. All right, so we don't want to split hairs. So we got a slap like what you just saw in that play. Here's what the rule states. And I apologize for that line. All right, so we see the backboard being slapped, and it causes the board to vibrate. Now, that vibration doesn't end instantaneously. That vibration, and this comes directly from two of the people that were involved in the rule change. The vibration continues, and that's what is talking about here. And if we continue with this action, so please note, the ball does not necessarily have to be on the ring. Like we can see here, it's not on the ring yet, but the fact that we have made a decision that the ring is still vibrating when it gets there, then that is still considered to be basket interference. Now, what they mean by having a chance to go in, now obviously, if he could have hit the ball and the ball went directly backwards, or if the ball was undershot and hit underneath the rim, then we would not have basket interference, obviously. But those are really rare, rare, rare situations because if you stop and think of it, the rim is about that far from the bottom of the backboard. Most times the basketball itself is going to have some part of above that board, and as a result of it, that slap could have an effect on it. And again, don't split hairs. I think you know what the intention is. Now, we don't want, whoops, I don't want to lose sight of this. Don't misunderstand. Oops, that's not what I want. Right here. Please understand that even though you saw that red area that was taken out in regards to technical foul, you still could rule a technical foul on a slapping or striking of the backboard if you feel it was unsporting. In other words, they were trying to show up the player. The real classic would be one where the ball comes in on the left side, and we've seen this a couple times, and they slap the board on the right side. That is now still a technical foul, and it's still considered to be um, unsporting technical foul for slapping the backboard. So please don't misunderstand that. This question came up in regards to could you have a slapping of the backboard technical foul? And if slapping of the backboard causes the ring to vibrate, could you also have basket interference? And the commissioner cleared that up very easily in Phoenix. He stated simply he does not want double jeopardy. So, in other words, if you rule the technical foul because of the severity of the penalty, then we're going to go with the technical foul. So, simply stated, we're not going to have a technical foul and basket interference. Hopefully that makes that clear. Kudo number 8, I think this is the last one. Another block charge situation. Again, this is a tough one because it was obtain and maintain. And I'm not going to spend time going over that again because we've already done that twice. But you can see, we get the other angle. Red number 1 obtains. He moves laterally to maintain. He's contacted in the chest. And as a result, we have player control foul.
Jeff, can I make one last comment? I'll keep
Yep.
my notes up for the rest of the evening.
Yep.
These uniforms are a good reminder of what's legal in high school basketball. So if the white jersey player wants to wear a t-shirt or an undershirt, he's got to wear white, as you can see, far right-hand side, number 3 there. Got to be white because they got white jersey. The dark jersey team has 2 choices. In this case, they could wear red undershirts or black, as they've chosen to do here. And I bring this up now because there's a lot of NBA fans around here, and you're watching, and a lot of the NBA players are wearing all kinds of different. They'll have a dark jersey, a dark jersey on, and a white undershirt, which would be illegal in our game. So, just my last comment.
Good reminder. And I think this is where we stop the screen share and we open it up. First of all, Chris, any questions in the chat box?
No, I don't see any other questions.
All right, sounds good. So, does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns you would like to make? Quiet group again tonight. Very good. All right, then that means that we can do our countdown. Just before we do, a reminder, next week we're up to the 6A now. 6A girls and boys state championship kudos. So have a good week, people, and thanks for joining in.